Well, Fred used to have a normal head. And actually, I blame Fred for a lot of things in life, and perhaps you might too. But like it's the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, and where it all comes out of. But Fred used to have a normal head. He was a normal flea. He was just walking down the street, minding his own business, and then out of nowhere, some evil entity, outside fate, stepped in and pulled him in and put him in a mason jar and put a lid on it. And now Fred, being Fred, and he was a super jumper, he's the top in his class, his coach, won all the awards and everything. So Fred starts jumping and he bangs his head into the lid and bangs his head into the lid. And eventually he goes, wow, that hurts. But in, the way that he's been programmed, in the way that, like winners never quit and quitters never win. And so he keeps on, he now double times it and boom, boom, boom. Then all of a sudden he starts thinking about all of the pain that's going on. And he's like, like he starts blaming everybody else for the pain that's going on, but he doesn't see that it's kind of self-inflicted, right? Not kind of, it is self-inflicted. And the interesting thing about it is that he flattens his head, but all of this previous programming that, his parents and his preacher, teacher, coaches, all of the outside influences that were programming him as to what to do, that it conditioned him, he couldn't see that he was the source of his pain. So what he did was he's like, aha, I had this eureka moment. And this unfortunately was after his head was already flat and he had cracked his skull inside. Maybe that epiphany was pain induced. But he said to himself, well, if I just stop jumping as high as the lid once was, or the lid is, then I won't feel the pain anymore. And in less than 3 jumps, he trained himself to continue to jump and, not smack into the lid, and all of a sudden, no pain. But the interesting thing is that because he couldn't quit on himself, he couldn't give up, his identity became jumping, because he couldn't, he didn't like being in captivity. We all want our freedom, right? We don't want to be stuck in any box, so to speak, or jar in his case. And we end up, so he ends up continuing to jump, but he jumps even faster and higher, but he's only jumping as high as the lid is. Then fate comes along and steps in again and takes the lid off the jar. And the interesting thing about it is he'd say, well, I'm out. Like because he's perfectly capable of jumping out. He's got the ability. I mean, that's the reason why he got his flat head to begin with. But right. Yeah, he's got this. The interesting thing is that he continues to jump, but only as high as the lid once was. The lid is no longer there. And so we all have these limits that we believe in our life are there. And we're sure that it's absolutely, and to go any further equals pain. And yet, the funny thing is, or the sad thing is, or however you want to look at it, is that Fred's going to die in that jar, trapped in a prison that he created in his own mind. He's going to continue to jump because that has become his identity. That's who he is. He's not a sellout. He's the top in his class. He's the best at everything. So he continues to jump. He's going to burn himself out, but he's never going to go out of it again unless some sort of outside fate or something that pulls him in another direction. Somebody tips over the jar, somebody actually pulls him out of there, and he can reprogram it. But the thing is that we all have what I call these Fred stories, and they're unconscious, they're conditioned into us, and they happen, throughout our entire lives, and they limit us without us even knowing that they're limiting us, because they become invisible to us. And they become part of our unconscious awareness that we just accept is the truth. And, he goes through the whole gamut of when he's in there, like blaming his girlfriend or whatever, or, his parents who didn't take care of him. And he just longs to, not be hurt anymore. And yet he's got the freedom to be able to jump out anytime he wants. It's just that he's unable to see it. It's a three-step process. We tune into different beliefs. And by the way, a belief is just a thought that we've thought again and again and again to the point that it becomes something that we believe to be true. And all beliefs are limiting, right? Because they have a beginning and an end. It's not the unknowable, unwashed future, or the totality of life, right? The infinity of life. It's limited. So it's a thought. A thought has a beginning and an end. It has a limitation. Now, some of these thoughts or some of these beliefs serve us. They empower us. They get us closer to where we say we want to go. Some of them, without us knowing it, are taking us further away. So what I just would like to set as a foundation here is that how we create these Fred stories is that it's just a thought that we think again and again and again and again till it becomes a belief or a core belief. And so what ends up happening is that passing thoughts become habitual thoughts become, core beliefs, and then core beliefs become like an ironclad part of our identity of who we are. And somewhere between the core beliefs and, the habitual beliefs, it becomes invisible. It becomes part of our operating system, our mind's operating system, our heart's operating system. And so, here's a very real, I have what I call, and I believe that we all have this, foundational Fred stories, which is the core Fred story. Yeah, that's the story that starts all stories, that births everything else, that it's the original sin, so to speak, where you've got the one mistaken thing and then it breeds the next thing. It's kind of like if you looked at Fred's core foundational Fred story, it's that he's trapped in that jar, and that fate stuck him in there, and that he made him stay in there, and then from there it became everybody else's fault. It became or then he starts the self beat up mode, like, well, I must be too stupid, or I didn't, I must have done something in a previous life, and we hear that a lot if you're into the kind of the spiritual realm of things, like the karma cop out, and so the aspect of it is that it's all birthed from that core thing. Now, I didn't realize what my foundational Fred story was until years of dealing with and working on recognizing and dissolving some of the peripheral Fred stories that allowed me to start to, so you just deal with what you see. For me, for the longest time, from the time that I can remember, maybe as early as 5 years old, my goal was, and first value was freedom. And I had to make money. And to me, in my head, what I had equated, however it came to be, was that if I'm a millionaire, that equals freedom. So I pursued every single thing from literally the age of 5 years old, selling candy on the street corner, and on up. And then I got into Think and Grow Rich and stuff like that when I was in my late teens and into college. And, so I was always pursuing the next thing that was going to, make it work for me, that was going to fix it and give me that success that I wanted, give me the freedom that I craved. And for me, I was just going to say that one of those Fred stories that I didn't realize was that I was trying to look outside myself to fix myself and to change my circumstance, that if I could just become a millionaire, that everything would be done. And I had the struggles of overcoming and realizing that it wasn't about just buying more programs and listening to more stuff and reading more books. I'm still a big fan of personal development, as you can tell behind me, and that's just a small fraction. I mean, I've invested well into 7 figures in my self-education. And well, let me give you two examples of the Fred story. One is and both of them had a profound effect on the rest of my life. But I think it might help to see the one around 9 or 10 years old versus the foundational Fred, which actually happened, believe it or not, when I was 2 months old. And so for a lot of people, I think, at least for me, I don't know, like I couldn't recognize that that was even a possibility at 2 months old, that I had some of this conditioning and programming take place that I had no idea about. So here's the deal. My dad was a professional musician. He led the lifestyle of a professional musician, and he was brilliant as a professional musician. He played with some of the greatest musicians alive: Tito Puente, Ray Barretto, the band, John Lennon. He recorded with some of the greats. He was known for playing the trumpet and the entire brass instrument family. If you're over 35 years old or 40 years old, which you probably aren't if you're part of the Millennium podcast, then my guess is that he's probably on some of the albums or vinyl records in your collection or your parents' collection. But he never was able to live the freedom lifestyle that he wanted. And he was always in pursuit. He was the typical starving artist, the stereotypical, like you can't be true to your art and be successful. Somehow the two, whatever his Fred stories were that was going on, but that seems to be a common theme for those of us that have a strong creative artistry in us, that like we struggle with that tortured soul of the artist type thing, where we think you can't have one, it's an either or, it's not an and that money's evil and all of that stuff. So he had that very strong in his life. So even in spite of his brilliance, in spite of all the success that he had, all the people that he played with, and all the connections that he had in the industry, he was always paycheck to paycheck, paycheck to paycheck. And he was always constantly letting down me personally as his son. He didn't take care of me. He had a habit of making plans with me and the last minute canceling. And he would always want me to be there for him when he moved. He moved a lot. So I had to, help him pack up boxes, carry him up. Yeah, right. And so what ended up happening is that this one particular experience, there's a whole bunch of stories that I'm now remembering that are offshoots of all of this. But the one story that I wanted to share with you was there was this one time where we were going upstate New York for the weekend. And surprisingly enough, he didn't call and cancel on me at the last minute. He picked me up and we drove up there, and we had two bikes that he had on the bike rack, and we were going to have this whole biking weekend out of it, and get some exercise and be in the nature and the mountains up in upstate New York and so on. And he gets up there, we get up there, he pulls over to the side of the road and he says, get out. And I said, okay, is this where we're starting? He's like, yeah, just get your bike and get out. And he only took my bike off the bike rack. And he said, I'll see you in a little bit. I said, well, where are you going? He said, I got to take care of some stuff. Now, I did know that he was dealing drugs, that part of the way that he supplemented his income at that time was to sell weed. And so he was going up to his suppliers, to the grow house, to get his next supply. And I said, Dad, why do I have to wait here? Why can't I go with you? He said, well, I'm trying to protect you. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I don't want you to know where the grow house is, where my supplier is, where my dealers are. And because if you get captured by the FBI or the police or a rival drug gang. No, first it was the authorities, the legal community. First, he says to me, I don't want you to, I want to protect you. If you don't know where it is, then you can't tell them anything. I said, well, Dad, I would never drop a dime on you. Then he says, well, if if you got captured by a rival drug cartel, they would torture you until you told them. So this is my way of protecting you. And I'm like, yeah, I don't remember exactly, but I wasn't older than 10 or 11 max. And I remember thinking to myself, well, that's fantastic parenting. Because don't you understand that if they, even if I don't know and I get tortured, they're not gonna believe that I don't know where it is as your son. So they're gonna kill me anyway. So great job on protecting me, right? Yeah. And so this was part of a really bitterness that took hold on me. Although at the time I wasn't able to, I had to, in my mind, I had to make everything better. I had to accept everything that was. I couldn't express myself. I couldn't, like standing up for myself, being assertive was, not something that I knew how to do. And I was scared to do it because if I asserted myself in my mind, one of my Fred stories is my dad isn't going to love me. He's going to leave me. He's not going to ever want to see me again. And so like as a kid, I just internalized that and accepted that to be true. And I'll, at a certain point in time, I built up the courage to tell him to go fuck himself when he did it to me. But it wasn't until I was in getting ready to start college, actually, that I actually did it. And which was, by the way, after trade school, because I went from high school to trade school, then into college. And but it came out as go fuck yourself, which was, passive aggressive rather than being assertive and being okay that I'm just drawing a boundary. No, this is not acceptable. I'm not willing to do this. And so it took me a long time to realize the energy difference between the two. And a big piece of my personality is to be passive, to placate everything. At least it was. And until I can't take it anymore, until the dam bursts. And so then when the dam bursts, look out, because my New York City street kid comes out and I'll cut you. And that's where it ended up going. Like, that's how I survived. And as you can imagine, it burns bridges, it burns relationships. It's not the whole thing, but it's part of what ended my first marriage. It contributed to all of that.